All right, so Illy, thank you so much for participating in the Thoughtful interview. I'm really excited to have you here. I think you have a lot of wisdom to share. I think you have a lot of experiences to share, and just through the nature of your business, being a woman of faith, through your career and stuff like that, I know that a lot of folks can learn from you. So I'm really happy that you're here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share my life.
So, all right, awesome. So, since you're excited to share your life, why don't we start with just introducing yourself? Like, what do you do? I know you also have a business, so maybe talk a little bit about that. And then, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Illy, which is short for Ilianis. And first and foremost, what I always tell people is that I'm a woman of God, a child of God first. Then I'm a wife and a mom. I am a 9-to-5 girl, but I'm also an entrepreneur. So I have a couple different things going on. In my 9-to-5, I work in program management, operations, and I've done product management in the past. And in my business, I am actually a financial coach and educator. So I help individuals and families with managing their personal and business finances.
That was a lot. You said a lot, right? So you're a mom, you're a wife, you have a 9-to-5, you also have a business. How do you find the time to do all of that? Like, how do you balance that?
So my pastor told me once, there's no such thing as balance. And I do agree with that. I think when you think of balance, if you envision a scale, right, you have weight on one side, weight on the other side. And in order for you to balance it, you have to make them equal. And I don't think that that's what we do in life. I think it's about prioritization. There are some times that my faith takes the priority, right? So like Sundays, don't call me for work, don't call me for anything. That's my priority is Sabbath, right? Resting and just getting the word of God in and just spending time with my family and my loved ones. But there are other times where work takes a priority or my business takes a priority. So I think it's just a constant playing with the prioritization rather than trying to find the right balance. I also have let go of my expectations that every day will look the same or every week will look the same. And rather than trying to structure myself with like a specific routine with kind of trusting the rhythms of life and trusting myself to make decisions in the moment about what's a priority.
So I still think that's a lot, right?
Yeah.
So what I want to know, and even for me, right, I'm just trying to figure out what process would you use to prioritize, right? If we look at balance as like you just described it, right, then it's to say that it doesn't really exist in an equilibrium, I would say, but how do you prioritize to make sure that you do get your mental rest and that you still come through for your family, you still produce for your business and for your job?
I like this question. I actually get this question in interviews, and it's like my favorite question to answer. So I use something called the Eisenhower matrix. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the Eisenhower matrix is basically a quadrant where you prioritize the things you need to get done into 4 areas. And so you have the urgent and important things, so they're time sensitive and they're high value. That's in quadrant 1. And then the second quadrant, you have things that are of high value but not time sensitive. Then in the third quadrant, you have things that are time sensitive but not high value. And then the fourth is not time sensitive and not high value. So what do you do once you've kind of divvied everything up into the quadrants? Is quadrant 1 is urgent and high value, you do it right away. Quadrant 2, it's high value but not time sensitive, you schedule. So you have to get it done at some point, but it's not time sensitive, so you schedule it. So do and schedule are your top 2. The third quadrant, it's time sensitive, but it's not high value. And what I mean by high value is it's either not moving the needle for you or it's not necessary for you to do it. That quadrant, you delegate. One example is housekeeping. My house has to get clean because 5 people live in it. But I don't necessarily need to be the one to do it. So it's time sensitive, but low value for me, so I delegate. And then the fourth quadrant, if it's not time sensitive and it's not high value, then just don't do it. And now obviously if it's not an option for you to not to do it, then I move it into delegate. But that's really how I kind of try to look at things when I'm like overwhelmed and like, okay, what do I look at first? There's a whole list of things or there's a whole bunch of things in my day. It's just really kind of lining it up that way. And then that kind of guides my approach.
I think when a person is a CEO and has like all these different hats to balance, I've always noticed that they have like some sort of systematic program, right? There's always, everything is like scheduled. Everything is like, well, my calendar doesn't say that I should clean today, so I should do it the other way. And I think it's interesting, right? Because when you schedule stuff, what you're actually doing is creating time, right? You're allowing yourself to be available at some other specific point, which it sounds like you're really good at that.
Yes.
Right? And I'm wondering if, is that the system that you kind of use to build your business? Like, how did you get into, in addition to everything that you learned, how did you go from, okay, I need some more responsibility?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of mistakes in the process, right? I had to learn a lot of like hard lessons about how to prioritize my time and how to approach my to-do lists and all of the responsibilities that I have. And figure out a method that works for me. That's something I recommend to people all the time is you have to do what works for you, not what you think works across the board. So I have a digital calendar, for instance, and a digital to-do list, and that's kind of where I kind of organize everything. But on a day-to-day, I'll write down the top three things I need to get done that day and start from there. That's kind of my starting point, because looking at a list of 20 things to do is overwhelming. But the digital part keeps me mobile, keeps everything housed in one place. So finding how you can work with your way of working, like your lifestyle, but also what makes the most sense for the society we live in, right? Like I'm always on the go. I can't have a physical planner on me 24/7 to like schedule a dentist appointment. So I use my digital calendar, but I'll find ways to use like my manual system with my digital system.
So even before we get into a little deeper about that process, right? How you like balance all your business operations. Why don't you tell us what your business is?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah.
I know it's in finance. How did you get into that industry as opposed to any other industry?
Yeah. Much like a lot of other things that God does, beautiful accident. So I actually went to school for neuropsychology. And I had my son my first year of college, and I was rocking out and everything was fine. But I needed to start working in addition to going to school, and so I just started working at this like pizzeria, just kind of like making ends meet. And then I applied to a nonprofit because I wanted regular business hours, and I got a job at a nonprofit, like working front desk, and they did microfinance. And I just learned everything that I could and worked my way up the ranks. And then 6 years later, I was a senior loans product manager, and I knew a ton of stuff. So I started financial coaching working for that nonprofit, and what they were doing wasn't producing the results that I wanted to see from my clients. And so I took that as an opportunity to learn for myself how I could do it differently. And once the methods worked for me, then I started to do that with personal clients of my own. And that's kind of what launched FinaciaILLY. So it's a financial coaching and educator business. And what I do is coach people one-on-one, as well as couples and families, on how to manage their personal finances or their business finances if they're entrepreneurs. And I also provide workshops. So schools or organizations or employers that want to offer classes or workshops to their communities can hire me to do some kind of a workshop. So I'll do workshops on building credit, creating a budget, saving, debt management strategies, things like that.
Credit is definitely one of those very important things that I definitely feel like more folks should just know how to leverage it, how to use it, even going through like schools and universities and stuff like that. Just using credit is so important. Yeah. And I want to know, if I walked into your workshop, right, and you're talking about credit, like what does that workshop look like? Yeah. Right? What would I learn?
So the one thing I like to focus on is facts and not my feelings. What I notice from a lot of other financial educators is that they'll impose their feelings about something to the education they're providing. So, one example is like Dave Ramsey, right? Like Dave Ramsey is a faith-based financial educator, but he puts a lot of his own emotions about the financial industry into what he teaches. So, an example is he doesn't believe in credit. Like he doesn't think anyone should have credit. But that robs people of the opportunity of making their own educated decision, because if someone wants to buy a house, then now they don't know that they need credit because they followed someone's opinion about bad credit, right? And so I I want to offer people the opportunity to make their own educated decisions about their money. So yeah, my workshops are very like teaching a strategy and making it simple. So I'm not going to throw you an Excel sheet and tell you to plug in your annual expenses on lawn care, because that's just not everybody's situation. Really, it's about taking the information I'm giving you and applying it to your specific situation. So my workshops will be a little bit more generalized, but still information you'll take away. And then in the one-on-one model, that's where you can really personalize it to your lifestyle. So I have clients that are single, out of college, professionals want to travel more, but then I have clients that have 3 kids and a husband, and they have other goals, right? And so we modify accordingly.
So I listen to Dave Ramsey, so I know exactly what you're talking about. I think he would basically hate my financial plan because I travel a lot on credit cards.
Yeah.
And it's all free, right?
Which is great.
It's one of those things. It is a double-edged sword, right? But you're right. Like if you have the proper education and you know how to leverage it,
yes,
right? Then you can certainly get a lot of benefits out of it, right? It's that concept that a lot of folks also talk about, OPM, using other people's money.
Yeah.
So credit is a form of that, like leveraging, if you're strategic, future like funds to either pay off for work or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It really does impact the quality of your life depending on how much credit you use.
You have to understand the benefits and the risks of every financial decision. I think that a lot of financial education focuses on the benefits and then lightly gives the risk, like make sure you pay your monthly payment on time. Okay, why? Like I want my clients to know why. Like why should you pay it on time? Well, because on-time payment will result in this, and on-time payment is 30% of your, you know what I mean? Like that's what I really want them to understand, not just 3 bullet points on the benefits and 3 bullet points on the risks, and then you kind of take it and run with it.
Yeah, and we could definitely see just like, again, through the debt that we accrued in the US, like credit is such an important topic, right? And if you have an 800 credit score, you can essentially go into car lots and get reduced interest rates or 0 APRs, right? Like 0 completely. And it really does impact that. Like it is part of that. Yeah. And so you brought up also your faith, right? Your person of faith. And I'm wondering, how does that impact your business decisions? And the reason why I'm specifically asking that is because we know that you're a Christian, a lot of Christians kind of see a problem with them too, right? It's almost, they always go to the love of money is the root of all evil, right? So how did you overcome that? Because I feel like a lot of people are still battling that.
Yeah. So my basic understanding is I am called to serve. And so when making decisions about my business, is this serving me or is this serving God? And by serving God, is it serving others, right? So some people get stuck there and go, well, how's my business serving God if it's about financial education? I'm not teaching God about money. Well, I'm serving others, right? How am I serving others in order to serve God? I think that is what influences my decisions. Tithing from my business, obvious, right? Like just like I tithe my personal life, I have to look at my business in the same way. And it's something that I teach my clients as well, where like tithing and giving is a part of our budgets, right? Like we have to include that because I want my clients to get in the habit of thinking outside of themselves, right? Not just taking care of your situation and your families, but how can you give back? For some people that are not in the faith, that's not going to be giving to God, right? Tithing, it's going to be charitable donations. That's still serving God. That's still playing out my faith because I'm encouraging people to give. Maybe they're not there yet. They're not there in their journey of, knowing Christ where I can convince somebody to tithe. So I can't quote scripture and be like, well, Malachi 3:10 says, because they're not going to receive that, right? But charitable donations, right? So in the budget, it says tithes or charitable donations. Whichever word you relate to, great, still the same. It's the same service, and God is looking at it the same way. So whether you're donating to your church because you are a woman or man of God, or you're donating to Hasbro Children's Hospital because that's where your heart is led to, God sees that as serving others. So I think that's how I kind of bring it into my business and the decisions that I make.
I think Wow, that was very well put together, right?
Thanks. I did not know this question in advance.
No, I think the reason why I always appreciate getting into this specific conversation, right? Because, and I'm pretty sure this is the case for you, there's a lot of folks who I know personally who will not take a leap of faith because they feel like it's evil, right? They are afraid of their own ambition because it almost, the theology that was taught to them is almost, if you have ambition, that's ego, right? Like you were just saying, how am I going to teach God about money or whatever? So they kind of frame it in a way where it's like, well, it's not necessary.
Yeah.
So God doesn't need it.
Right.
And I don't need to do this. I don't need that ambition anyways because God has everything. But you brought up the biggest point, which is service.
Yeah.
Serving people. And that's what it's all about, right? Serving people. And you changed my mind about something, or at least you challenged my mind on charitable donations. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
At all. So that's a really good point.
Definitely.
Yeah. And, you know, there's other things that intersect with your identity. Like, again, I'm just trying to figure out how all of this plays into your business, into your career, because there's a lot of folks that are in this space right now. And I know you're also a feminist, right? And I'm wondering if that impacts the way that you do business as well. Like being a feminist, a Christian first, of course. Christian, feminist, and a business CEO, right?
Yeah.
How do you intersect all of that? I'm really impressed by how you juggle everything.
Yeah, thanks. I am not impressed. I think, you know, with being a feminist, I think it goes back to understanding the definition of feminism and what the original goal is, which has gotten muddled over time. And so that's where a lot of like these opposing views come in. You know, feminism at its core is about equal access, equal rights, and opportunities. And so when I am building my business, when I'm building services or products, or even at my job, you know, I'm consistently thinking, you know, how am I making sure that I am making this accessible to all? And I can give you a more specific example with my business. You know, with financial coaching, you're in quite a predicament because you're dealing with people that are already struggling with money, and now you have to figure out how to charge them for the service that they need. And that was something I struggled with, and I went to God a lot. Like, God, I know that people need this service, but I also like can't afford to provide the service for free. So like, how do I do this, right? And you know, He's been so gracious to kind of guide me through how I'm going to be able to serve. But it's also a challenge for me to surrender, to know that He will provide for me, even while I'm giving that service. And so that's kind of how I bring that like Christian aspect into the business, and then the feminism with making sure that the accessibility is there, regardless of gender, regardless of culture, regardless of, you know, race and identity. You know, is the access, the right to the opportunity, is it available? I think that's really what I focus on with bringing both of those things into my business.
I think it's really interesting, right? Because a lot of, from my understanding anyways, and from my experience, a lot of feminists kind of look at Christian women, or like the role of a Christian woman, right? We can unpack that because roles per se is something that we can spend hours to unpack. But they kind of see the Bible and all that, and, you know, kind of categorize women, oh, that's too submissive, I'm not going to deal with this. Meanwhile, you have a business, you work a 9 to 5, and you delegate at times to like get house clean or whatever it is, based on your strategy and your quadrants. So how do you like face those stereotypes? How do you combat those? Like if a woman was sitting right here, was a feminist, and said that same thing, like, oh, that's too submissive, knowing that you run a business, right? How do you combat that?
Yeah, so I've learned so much in my faith about understanding, you know, my role as a woman, my role as a wife. You know, there was a time I wasn't a wife, so my role as a woman, my role as a wife, my role as a mom, all of those things have a meaning, they have a place. And the Bible also calls us to be kind of a partner with our husband, and how those things are complementary. And I think that's where the challenge is with feminism, where somewhere along the way, feminism moved away from equal access, rights, and opportunities to we want to be the men. We don't need the men. And so that was a weird transition, I think, and not the original goal. We don't want to wipe out the male species. Like we want and need men, just like they want and need women. I think it's understanding how we complement each other and how we each have a job to do, and only we can do that specific job. I can't be a man no matter how hard I try. No matter how much I, stomp my feet and burn bras at, conventions and rallies, like that's not gonna make me a man. And I shouldn't want to be a man. I love being a woman and being in my womanhood. So I think, I challenge the stereotypes by just showing how I can still be a woman while having those access and the opportunities and the rights that we fought so hard for. I bring that into my marriage and my home, and how we kind of balance things out at home. I am grateful that I'm not in a marriage where my husband's like expecting me to do certain things, but God also places certain desires in our hearts for us to want to do certain things. And so, my want to know more about cooking is a way of serving my family, is a way of me feeling like I'm doing my part, but not I'm submitting to being a housewife and, cooking all the time, right? So I think it's just finding where your identity is and knowing that living a godly life isn't canceling out living a feminist life.
That was really well said. And if you ask me, I think women are the stronger sex. My mother raised me single. I still have no idea how she raised 3 kids.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a superpower in that, definitely.
Yeah.
And so with that, I'm just wondering, right? Because you mentioned the transition in terms of they want to replace the men, right? And I certainly feel that, but again, I'm looking at it from the outside.
Yeah.
So what's your thought about that? Like, what do you think, where did that spirit come from, or where did that ideology come from? Because it is true, like, why not just, I'm happy as a man, you're happy being a woman, right? Why can't we just be happy with that?
Yeah. I think, I don't know where it kind of shifted, but, I think when feminism really started to take its course, it was women that were frustrated with not having the right to do certain things, or the freedoms to do certain things. And then somewhere along the way, some people took that and changed it into, oh, we don't want to be home and cook and clean and raise kids and do all of those things. We want to work. So now we're like forced into the workforce and doing, and so we lost sight of, well, what about the women that do want to be at home? And we just want the right to be able to go do something without asking my husband for permission, but I still want to be home and raise my kids. So I think that's where now we're on the other end of the spectrum where now we have to work and raise kids. Now we have to work and do, all of the things. Because now we shame women for wanting to be housewives and, homemakers and whatever, right? So is that working in feminism's favor? Are we now allowing those equal opportunities and equal rights by shaming women for choosing the opposite of what we think they should? So I think that's, where it kind of went wrong. I don't know what specifically, but I want to say part of it was the Industrial Revolution, women getting into work and just being more involved. While all of that is fantastic, I do think that it robbed women of the opportunity to find their identities as women and wives, and even as women of God, while also being feminists. It was you had to choose one or the other. So in a lot of ways, women lost the ability to understand how they can be a Christian and support the feminist movement too.
Roles are tied in with identity. And identity, at the end of the day, it is a choice, right? You choose how you want to identify. You would choose what you identify with. And of course, you have your lived experience, right? So I'm curious, since we know that, based on the conversation that we're having, how would you define one submission? And how do you think identity plays a role with the roles, right? Do you follow?
So defining submission to start. I define submission as letting go of control. I think, yeah, that's what highlights for me is letting go of control, because I submit to God, and when I do that, I say, okay, I let go of trying to control how the situation's gonna play out, how I want it to play out, how I think it should play out. I let go of my expectations. I'll submit to you. I also submit to God in what he expects me to do, right? Where it's like, okay, well, even if I don't think I should do that, I'm gonna do it because I'm submitting to your will. And then in marriage, right? Submission in marriage. I can't control my marriage. I can't control everything. We are two humans. We are both children of God. I'm not more special than he is. We're both equal children of God, and God has given both of us desires and things that we want. And the way that we are, he completely designed it, right? He knows every hair on our body. So I can't try to control the entire situation of something that is two people united. So submitting is submitting that I won't have the control of everything. And in marriage, a husband's called to be a leader. So by submitting, you are allowing the space for that husband to be a leader. If I don't submit, then I don't let him step into his role that God has given him. So I'm helping him in that way with my submission. The second part of your question, could you repeat it?
It was just basically identity and roles, right? Based on how you identify, that plays out your role. And the reason, just to kind of circle it all back together, the reason why I asked about submission is because me as a man, obviously I submit, but there is like a negative connotation when like women and submission are used like in the same sentence or like work, whether if it's traditional roles. So I guess I'm just trying to unpack that, right? So how do you think like the identity piece plays into the roles based on what we just talked about, like submission?
Well, I think
I can give an example of anything.
Yeah, sure.
So, for instance, we both use the example, or use the example as a Christian, right? And me as a man, as a Christian, when I go to God, I have to submit, right? I'm also a business. I'm running my own business, so I have to figure out what God wants me to do, how He wants me to serve, and I have to also figure out, God, do you want me to interview this kind of person, right? And if it doesn't align with whatever it is, maybe with our goals, maybe they're a person who's hateful, I have to deny that. So in that case, it's submission to God. Now to, my girl, I do the dishes at home, right? So I can't let that pile up, right? Because I know what the expectation is. So in that regard, that's me submitting to my girlfriend, right? Just, hey, Alex, this is the expectations, get this done. Yes, it's going to happen. And, I think in that place, sometimes folks could be like, well, I'm a man, I don't have to do dishes. What are we talking about?
Yeah.
Right? So identity definitely plays a huge role in roles within families.
Yeah. I think with the identity piece, I'm going to preach, right, what I know, which is it's so important that I have my faith to guide me first, because I can cross-reference everything with the Bible, right? And is this decision that I'm making honoring God, right? Like, let me go to the Bible. Does this align with the Word? Does this align with the will of God? And that's how feminism easily plays into my identity, because I'm first a Christian, then a feminist. And so if I'm going to make a decision, if I'm going to submit and it's questioning my femininity, then I have to go back to the Word. And I have to say, well, okay, what does the Word say? The Word calls me to submit. The Word says and shows that women are much more than just submissive beings with our heads down, like getting beat by our husbands. Like, that's not what God wants for us. And I think that's the important part, is that you have something to compare it to. Feminism on its own is difficult because now you're basing your identity on the opinions of millions of other people who have the same identity, but we're not standing on one thing together. One thing we talk about in our faith is like the body of Christ and how we work as a body. I don't see feminism working in that way. I don't see it working as a union. I see it as like a cluster of emotions, a cluster of opinions, and you just kind of have to find the one that matches you. You'll find the person that thinks, well, women shouldn't have to procreate and do all these other things. You shouldn't have to marry, or you shouldn't have to do that. Like, you just have to kind of figure out which opinion you align with most. Whereas in the faith, we have one thing that we stand on. So we work as a one body and we just agree on that. So even if we start to kind of stray, we come back, and it's centered. It's like a magnet that brings us back into what we need to stand on. So, with me, my identity primarily stands there before I bring anything else into it. And that's what I use in order to understand my role as a wife, my role as a mom, my role as an entrepreneur. All of that has to come back to my main goal, which is being a Christian.
So it sounds like the identity of you being a Christian serves as a proxy,
Yeah.
right? Where you can compare anything and anything to it.
Yeah.
So I think that's super important, especially now, because there's just a lot of folks who feel lost, right? And like you said, if they start identifying with movements, that's opinions.
Yes.
And opinions change.
Yes.
Like the seasons,
Yeah,
right? So one
absolutely.
moment you know who you are, and then the next moment they pivot and it's like, well, I guess I'm this now.
And then you don't know who you are, right? I mean, if we think about, for example, prohibition, there was a time where people thought alcohol was crazy. Like, people that drink alcohol, like, it was banned, and here we are, fast forward hundreds of years. I don't know how long ago it was, but like, here we are now, and it's totally normal. We have liquor stores, and like, they're at every event, right? Alcohol is totally normalized. So if your identity was anti-alcohol, now you're forced to question your identity because the season changed, the society opinion changed. Same thing now with like cannabis, right? Like, we're kind of getting into the era where it's getting more normalized. So if your identity is anti-cannabis or pro, you're going to eventually face an identity crisis versus standing on something that won't change with time.
I mean, his word endures forever. Amen. But before we get into our preaching and all that good stuff, what's next for you? Like, what's your next step?
In anything specific?
I don't need, pick one of your 5
Oh my gosh.
roles, whatever. Let's start with business. Definitely there, and then we can backtrack or.
Yes. So with my business, what I'm trying to do is, what's next is I'm trying to create like a self-guided course for people to be able to take on their own, so that time will no longer be a barrier, as well as cost, because if I'm able to kind of create self-guided content, then more people will be able to access it without buying my time per se. So that's what's next for my business. I've been doing online workshops. I used to do in-person workshops pre-COVID, but I haven't done any yet post-COVID. And I've done in-person and online, one-on-one coaching. So that's going well. And I just want to kind of move that, again, thinking about accessibility all the time. I'm just constantly thinking about those people that are just under not being able to afford it, I have clients that have reached out and they're like, I just can't afford it. Like, I'm literally check to check, and so I'm always thinking about them and how I can make it more accessible for them. I want to give them the same information. I don't want to rob them of that. So just asking God to increase my capacity and what I can do in order to make that accessible.
I think anytime you serve God and in some capacity, He'll definitely come through.
Yeah, and He surprises us, right? Like, there are ways that I've started to serve that I never imagined serving. So he's creative.
Well, Illy, that's what I had for you. The questions and all that good stuff. Thank you so much. It was such a rich conversation. I know that whoever hears this is definitely going to learn a lot.
Yes.
And definitely going to take a lot of gems for them to kind of process.
Good. I'm so glad. I'm happy. Thank you for having me. And this was so great. It went by so fast.
I know, right? Time flies when you're having fun. So.
Yes.
Absolutely. So until next time, we'll definitely invite you back.
Thank you. I'm happy to come back.